Now with a good delivery of parts, I can start dressing the engine. And I started with the turbo. Now you shouldn't reuse any of the gaskets or copper washers, so I bought an installation kit from Autodoc. And furthermore, I've added a turbo heat blanket. Now I'm a little bit worried about whether this is going to make the turbo run hot, although the reconditioners, Midland Turbo, said it should be absolutely fine, but obviously you've got to make sure that the oil and water pipes run outside the blanket. On YouTube they show it's about a 30-second job to install this, not a bit bloody fiddly, and you've got to disconnect and reconnect the various pipes. And I've also made up a heat shield covering this hot area as part of the heat management program. Just a few small details before I move on from the turbo. Now the turbo has oil and water pipes connected to it, and these need to be inspected. And for example, this little guy hidden in behind here looks as if it's been there since the engine was manufactured. Well worthwhile replacing it now. If that fails in the middle of a big trip, you've got big problems. Now I've added quite a bit of heat wrap as well, and this is held in place with stainless steel ties, and when you cut them off they leave wickedly sharp ends, and I've seen a mechanic give himself a bad gash on one of these. So please do what I do, and that is turn the ends under using some long nose pliers. Much safer that way. And now sort out the troublesome adapter ring. I took out the previous 8mm studs, drilled it out to take 10mm fine thread studs. These are a good tight fit inside the bell housing, and that's not going to move at all. And furthermore, I'm going to use both nuts and lock nuts just to make it doubly secure. Now the adapter ring is held onto the back of the engine with these 4 bolts here. And because of the design, you've got to use the Allen socket heads. Now the 2 bolts on the whole vehicle which are most prone to working loose are these 2 at the bottom. And the way they're designed to work, you've got an unthreaded portion here, it's threaded through this flange, and you can then put a lock nut on the end. Job done. But it isn't. I know that sooner or later it will finally work loose. The only thing which works without fail are castle nuts. Now it's a real pain drilling out these stainless steel bolts to take the castle nuts, but this really is a case where you've got to go the extra mile to do the job right. Now the next item I had to sort out when I got back to the UK was the clutch. I'd already destroyed one clutch in Namibia, and the replacement clutch plate we fitted there was well shot by the time we got back to South Africa. So I needed something much stronger. I looked around all the usual parts suppliers and they all advertised heavy duty clutches, but when you look more closely, 9 times out of 10 they're just standard road going clutches. But one name which kept popping up as a supplier of heavy duty clutches was LOF clutches. I entered into contact with them and communicated with a guy there called Luke, very helpful. I think he may be the boss, I'm not quite sure. And based on his recommendation, I bought the heaviest clutch that they sell just below their extreme range, which is used for competition off-roading. And I have to say that when it arrived, I was very impressed. Beautifully made. The clutch plate itself, it's got very heavy torsion springs in, lots of rivets. And when I compared its weight against a standard clutch plate, it's over twice as heavy. And also the release bearing. Now a normal release bearing, the housing here is made out of plastic, whereas on the LOF clutch it seems to be milled out of a block of steel. Very impressed with it. But one detail I had sought out was the spigot bush. Now the spigot bush they provide is obviously for a Land Rover flywheel. The Daihatsu flywheel is rather different. It's got a rather complicated stepped hole, and in order to work out how far the input shaft to the gearbox stabs in and exactly where you want the spigot bush to sit, I did a little drawing. I bought a standard bush from Bearing Boys in Norwich. I had to make a few adjustments. I had to ease it with a grinding wheel, and it's now a light interference fit inside the flywheel, and everything's installed. I hope never to see this boy again during my overlanding travels. Now there's a footnote to the spigot bearing, and it doesn't reflect very well on me. When the bush arrived from Bearing Boys, it comes at 30mm long. Without thinking, I cut it down to 20mm, which is the length of the Land Rover spigot bush, and it's also the length of the reduced section on the end of the gearbox input shaft. But when I did my sketch, it looked a little bit short, so I did a final measure up, and sure enough, it is a bit short. It's not going to be fully seated inside the flywheel, and it's also not going to cover the full length of the end section of the gearbox input shaft. In the past I might have said it's good enough, but one of the things I've learnt is it's not good enough if it's not completely right. So I've ordered another spigot bush, and I'm going to have to disassemble the clutch to install it. Quite a bit of work, but at least I'll know that the job is right.